And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's October the 8th, the 281st day of the year. 84 days remain to the year's over with. Holidays and observances. It is National Emergency Nurses Day, National Curves Day, Canadian Beer Day, National Pierogi Day. It's a tasty flour and egg dumpling filled with your choice of meat, potatoes, cheese, onions, and all the other good stuff. It's said that the whole world loves pierogies. Alvin C. York Day. He was a American soldier during World War I. Captured almost 200 Germans by himself. World Octopus Day, Animal Action Day, Bring Your Teddy Bear to Work and School Day, National Pet Obesity Awareness Day, International Newspaper Carrier Day, International Podiatry Day, International Top Spinning Day. Tops are certainly a fun toy. I used to enjoy playing with them as a child. International Birth Registration Day, International Off-Road Day, National Fluffer Nutter Day. It's a enjoyable sandwich that's made from putting peanut butter and marshmallow cream between two slices of bread. Now, personally, I preferred peanut butter and banana. I loved it. National Cowboy Boot Day, National Mall Walking Day, National Harbor Master Appreciation Day, America Touch Tag Day, National Stop Bullying Day, National Manufacturing Week, International Plasma Awareness Week, Seed Gathering Season, Red Valley, National Curry Week, Truffle Days in Croatia, Oktoberfest in Blumenau, Irish Film Festival. Now, it's a celebration of LGBTQ cinema. It's held in Cardiff. And World Space Week. Famous people born on this date: Bella Thorne, Bruno Mars, Matt Damon, Nick Cannon, Sigourney Weaver, loved her in Aliens, Chevy Chase, and Sun Yi Previn. Now, we're going to see what stories we have in the news. National Guards arrived in Illinois. Chicago mayor is having a meltdown. He's declared war on President Trump. The Texas National Guard deployed 200 soldiers to Illinois for federal protection mission amid protests from officials in Illinois. Pentagon officials said 200 guardsmen were mobilized for an initial 60-day period. They arrived in Illinois and supported federal protection mission to protect federal functions, personnel, and property. About a dozen people have been arrested in Illinois near an immigration and customs enforcement facility in Broadview. Anti-immigration crowds have been gathering there for days. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced Saturday that additional special operations personnel will be deployed to Illinois after federal agents were rammed and boxed in by 10 cars. Fox News cameras captured footage Tuesday afternoon outside the Army Reserve Training Center in Elwood, just south of Joliet. Showed several National Guard troopers on site. The Texas Governor Greg Abbott posted on X, service members are on the ground and ready to go. They're putting America first by ensuring the federal government can safely enforce federal law. Well, there's been a rumor that former FBI Director James Comey is going to be arraigned in federal court. He's been indicted for alleged false statements and obstruction of justice. There was a rumor that he was going to be put through a perp walk, publicly arrested and walked for cameras. He says he's innocent, of course. He's never done anything wrong. He's set to have his first court appearance at 10 a.m. in the Albert Bryan United States Courthouse in the Eastern District of Virginia. And the judge presiding over the hearing is District Judge Michael S. Nachmanoff. We'll see if he is fair and impartial or if he's one of God's anointed. Zach Bryant is backtracking after the controversy over the preview of his new song. Been a lot of backlash. It's certainly anti-Trump. Senate GOP has broken the blockade. They confirmed 107 Trump nominees as government shutdown continues. The Democrats have been blocking the approval of these nominees. Lawmakers voted along party lines to confirm 107 of Trump's nominees, a move that whittled down the remaining pending nominees on the Senate's calendar to just double digits. Also came as the upper chamber was deadlocked in the midst of a government shutdown, during which floor votes were largely been dedicated to trying to reopen the government. Schumer's shutdown is still in force. Police officer in Missouri was killed in the line of duty. He was helping serve a warrant. The suspect that is said to have shot him was found dead. He was assisting in a mutual aid operation in Mississippi County, according to officials. Officer Henry Franklin, 41, was fatally shot October 6th, helping the Mississippi County Sheriff's Office serve a warrant at a residence. The warrant was for Nathan Peters, 36, one in connection with a homicide that took place earlier that day. Peters barricaded himself in and started shooting. Hit Officer Franklin. Well, Mexican Mafia command structure has been damaged. The FBI and the LAPD busted a violent Mexican Mafia-linked gang. According to Cash Patel, the era of the cartel is over. They arrested 14 suspected leaders of the Rancho San Pedro gang Tuesday in Los Angeles, capping a years-long investigation what the FBI called one of the most violent street crews in Southern California and a known arm of the Mexican Mafia. According to Patel, the era of the cartels operating freely in America is over. Every day, the FBI and our partners are dismantling violent networks at the source, stripping their resources, taking criminals off the streets, and saving American lives. The FBI's Los Angeles field office reported agents executed 16 search warrants across San Pedro and nearby communities with the help of the LAPD, Homeland Security Investigations, and the California Department of Justice. So we'll see if that continues. Well, Ma'am Danny is in the news again. Republican has labeled him little more than a Muslim terrorist, advocates yanking his citizenship and deporting him. Republican Representative Randy Fine of Florida lambasted New York City Democratic mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani as little more than a Muslim terrorist, asserting the Empire State Assemblyman should be stripped of his citizenship and deported immediately, if not sooner. He said it's a disgrace who was ever granted citizenship. He should be stripped and he should be deported to the Ugandan S-hole he came from. That was in a text that the Florida representative put on X. In response to a statement Mamdani issued on the 2-year anniversary of the October 7, 2023 Hamas terror attack against Israel. In that statement, Mamdani acknowledged Hamas carried out a horrific war crime. And then he went on to assert the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the government of Israel mounted a genocidal war and the U.S. government has been complicit. Well, that's certainly not going to win him any friends. Well, Newsom is blocking the recovery of a lot of homeless folks. It's been called a profound moral failure. A lot of folks are saying he made a catastrophic mistake. The California Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed Assembly Bill 255 October 1st bipartisan measure designed to expand access to recovery housing for homeless individuals struggling with substance use disorders. The bill would have allowed 10% of state homelessness funds to support abstinence-based recovery housing. The program integrates shelter with sobriety requirements, accountability, and supportive services that help people reclaim stability. Newsom said that was unnecessary, insisting current guidelines already permit sober housing and warning against duplicative categories. And of course, since Newsom is smarter than anybody else you might talk to, and he'll tell you that if you ask him. Well, a mysterious canoe has been found after Hurricane Ian passed through. Nobody knows where it came from, who made it. It was discovered in Fort Myers, Florida in the fall of 2022. It's been restored. The conservation is now complete, but the mystery of where it came from and how old it is still remains. The canoe's form is unusual in Florida, and research is still ongoing to determine its origin. Comparisons to similar vessels found in the Caribbean suggest it may have connections to that region. Well, Border Patrol announces the fewest border apprehensions since 1970. Trump administration has announced it closed out fiscal 2025 with the lowest U.S. Border Patrol apprehensions since 70. The apprehensions amounted to 237,565 apprehensions in fiscal year 2025. In 1970, it was 201,780. The figure comes despite 72% of the total occurring during the last 111 days of the Biden administration. You know, under Biden, the door's open, folks. Come on down. October Prime days are ending today. You can get some good savings on a lot of power tools and iPads and other items. Dolly Parton's sister Frida asked the world to pray for the country star after health challenges forced her to cancel or postpone concerts. Well, Jesse Waters made the comment, and it's quite true. The left is fighting hard to defend everything it wants to do for the undocumented. You never see the left fight this hard for Americans. The belief is if they can give free health care to every undocumented who wants to come, they're all going to vote Democratic forever. That was in line with Lyndon Johnson's belief. Well, Virginia Democrat seems to have a problem with violence. Last week, Virginians across the political spectrum were shocked to read text messages from Democratic Attorney General nominee Jay Jones. He fantasized about murdering a former Republican colleague and wished death on his children. The reports first surfaced in 2022. Just after resigning from the House of Delegates, Jones sent a disturbing string of text messages to another legislature stating if his Republican colleagues died before him, he'd go to their funerals just to urinate on their graves. Then he said he had 2 bullets and was faced with the prospect of shooting Paul Pot, Adolf Hitler, and former Republican House Speaker Todd Gilbert. He'd say Gilbert will get both the bullets. That's a great attitude for an elected official to have. Well, former Bud Light ad guru has compared Sydney Sweeney's success in her ads with the Mulvaney disaster. If you remember, Mulvaney, the transgender, was used as the poster person for Bud Light. Almost destroyed the company. Sydney Sweeney in her ad for the jeans sent sales through the roof. Well, there's been a lot of questions asked about the waterfront fire of the judge's mansion. Arson's been ruled out in that fire. South Carolina authorities are stepping back from arson as a potential cause for the fire at the waterfront home of a longtime judge and her Vietnam War hero husband after preliminary investigation. But there's still questions about what caused the fire that leveled their $1 million home in Edisto Beach. Judge Diane Schaefer Goodstein, 69, was out walking her dogs when the house went up in flames this Saturday. Her husband, 81-year-old former state lawmaker Arnold Goodstein, suffered broken legs after jumping out a window to escape the fire. Their son and grandson were also injured. But according to the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division, there's no evidence to indicate the fire was intentionally set. There have preliminary investigations found no evidence to support a pre-fire explosion as well. So they're trying to figure out what caused the fire. So far, they ain't got very far. Well, as President Trump's Gaza deal gets near, families are warning Israel not to free another Sinwar. Sinwar used to run Hamas. He's got a 20-point plan to end the Gaza war. And as President Trump's plan moves forward, Israel faces a pivotal decision that could reshape the conflict's aftermath. This framework envisions a phased Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, return of all the hostages, and a major prisoner exchange. In return, Hamas would commit to disarmament and allow a technocratic transitional authority to manage Gaza's reconstruction. Part of the agreement involves releasing hundreds of convicted Palestinian terrorists. And that's what's got everybody upset, from families of victims. We'll see how that plays out, if it does. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court's been skeptical of conversion therapy law, banning treatment of minors with gender identity issues. They appeared ready to strike down Colorado's ban on mental health professionals providing so-called conversion therapy to minors with gender identity or sexual orientation issues. There's still a large segment of the population that believes there's not just two genders. There's ever how many you want. Well, Israel has seized another Gaza flotilla. They're trying to break the country's naval blockade and reach Gaza. That's going to Israeli Foreign Ministry. And Foreign Ministry also said it was a futile attempt and ended in nothing. Ministry also said the vessels and the passengers were transferred to an Israeli port and were safe and in good health. It was a 9-boat fleet carrying 145 activists participating in the Freedom Flotilla Coalition and 1,000 Madlenes to Gaza. That's going to the AP. Flotilla organizer said in a statement the fleet was carrying more than $110,000 worth of aid, including medicine and respiratory equipment and nutritional supplies meant for Gaza hospitals. Well, if you remember, shortly before this, we had Greta Thunberg and her flotilla. She faked an attack in order to get newspaper headlines. Well, even President Trump is saying the National Guard is not a permanent fix for the cities. Calling in National Guard and federal law enforcement isn't a solution. It's a signal the system in that particular area is broken. Chicago is learning the hard way what happens when outdated police hiring practices collide with political cuts. Since 2019, more than 2,100 police positions in Chicago have been eliminated, while the city added layers and layers of bureaucracy. Chicago Police Department still had 795 unfilled vacancies, compounded by 833 position cuts under Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson and 614 by former Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Well, the end result of all these cuts is President Trump is sending in the National Guard. And Memphis has much the same situation. The police force in Memphis is at the lowest level in 20 years, leaving patrols thinner and response times slower and detectives drowning in unsustainable caseloads. Temporary federal surges can help, but they don't rebuild a police force or restore long-term safety. And National Guard troops aren't trained to investigate murders, de-escalate violent domestic calls, or build trust with residents. The mere fact they're there is proof that the system has failed, not a strategy for success. Well, Democrats in Tennessee have picked what they're calling the AOC of Tennessee as a nominee for Tennessee special congressional election. Her name is Afton Bean, B-E-H-N. She advances to a special election in a battle for vacant congressional seats in a deep red district. She's a former healthcare community organizer and current Democratic state representative. She got her party's nomination. And the Dickson County Democratic Party is touting her name as our very own AOC of Tennessee. Everybody seems to think AOC, a former bartender, has all the answers to every question. She don't even know what the questions are. Well, the Treasury Secretary is sounding an alarm on the housing market as home sales at decades low. And finally, scientists may have discovered the first gene therapy for an incurable brain disease. I'm talking about Huntington's disease, a brain disorder until now has had no effective treatment. Researchers at University College London announced positive results from a global clinical trial for a new gene therapy called AMT-130. Developed by the Dutch biotechnology company Unicure, it's the first to be tested in people with Huntington's, according to the researchers. Now, for those that are not familiar with it, Huntington's is a rare inherited neurodegenerative disorder that progressively damages nerve cells in the brain. It's defined by the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. Typically emerges between 30 and 50 years of age in people. It's caused by a mutation in the HTT gene, which triggers cells to create a protein called huntingtin that can cause damage to the brain. Well, we've been talking about UFOs and ghosts and everything else you can imagine. And I've always said there's a whole lot of questions to be asked and answered. And somebody sent me a text wanting to know, couldn't you use a Ouija board to get the answers? Now, in my younger days in college, using the Ouija board in the evening in the dorms used to be quite the thing to do. And especially when the guys went to the girls' dorms. I did it quite a number of times with a very estimable young lady. Now, she was having headaches, and nobody could figure out what was causing them. And I said, ask the Ouija board. Well, it told her that she had had a fall, and she had a concussion. Well, she went to the doctor, who confirmed what the Ouija board said. Now, for those curious about the paranormal, the Ouija board is seen as a useful, if not foreboding, tool to communicate with the beyond. And for the more skeptical among us, it's a simple game. And it's marketed as a game. It's a popular entertainment choice for teenage slumber parties. And no matter which side of the coin you're on, even if you're sitting on the fence, the modern-day Ouija board actually has deep roots in American spiritualism. And whether it's truly capable of communicating with the beyond is up to the user to decide. Well, in the 1840s, a new wave of spiritualism was gaining popularity throughout the U.S. and Europe. And it was based on the belief that spirits had important knowledge they wished to impart to the living. Spiritualistic church sprang up all over the country, led by mediums, people with a special connection to the beyond, or in many cases, those that thought they had a special connection. Well, nobody knows exactly how spiritualism began, but some historians believe after the Civil War, people in general became more interested in the idea of communicating with the dead since so many loved ones had been lost during the fighting. It was in the mid-1800s that Kate and Margaret Fox, two sisters and mediums living in New York, managed to contact and communicate with the spirit of a dead peddler. Supposedly he had been buried in their basement. Story goes they did it by listening to the knocks the spirit made on a wall and translating them into letters of the alphabet. They began doing public demonstrations of their communication with various spirits and became instant celebrities. And from these humble beginnings, an explosion of tools to communicate with the beyond were soon developed. Table turning was another method of calling on the spirits that soon became popular. A medium would sit with a group of sitters who wished to communicate with the spirit world, who would all rest their fingers on the edge of a table and wait. And if they succeeded in making a connection with the spirit world, the table would start to move, tilting and knocking its legs on the floor. And the medium would then interpret the knockings as letters of the alphabet. Of course, like the wall knocking method used by the Fox sisters, his method of communication was very cumbersome. So as a way of dealing with impatient customers, mediums would simply enter a trance to communicate with the beyond. But a lot of folks felt this method lacked authenticity because you don't know if they were really in a trance or not. Well, other mediums developed the use of what was called the planchette, heart-shaped device similar to the one you see in the Ouija board. Instead of being used as a pointer, this planchette had a pencil attached to the end so the spirits could guide the medium's hands and spell out a message. While it was more accessible and entertaining than the knocking method, people often complained the spirits had terrible handwriting. Search for an effective communication tool continued till finally the first talking board, as it was called, was arrived on the scene. Now, it's not really known when the first talking board was invented. This is because most talking boards were made at home from scratch. But in 1886, the New York Daily Tribune reported that people in Ohio were making talking boards, Ohio being a state at the forefront of the spiritualism movement. And these boards covered all the basics needed for communication: the alphabet, numbers, the words yes and no, and good evening and good night. And all of a sudden, talking boards were the tool to communicate with the beyond. And of course, their popularity soared. Tapping into this newfound demand, in 1891, the Kennard Novelty Company patented one version of a talking board. They had the intention of selling it commercially, and they called it the Ouija board, or the Ouija board. Many people mistakenly believe the word Ouija comes from the French and German words for yes, oui and ja. In reality, the company adopted the word Ouija from an ancient Egyptian word meaning good luck. So the Ouija board was born. Selling price, a massive $1.50. Soon after, in 1893, William Fuld took over the Ouija board, hoping to sell it to the mass market. No longer the tool of spiritual mediums alone, the board's popularity grew over the years. But Fuld was already cryptic about the Ouija board's working. He never publicly disclosed if, or more importantly, how the board actually worked. It became a popular game to play with dates, mainly because it gave couples an excuse to sit together in the dark with their hands touching, and their knees in many cases. Despite the game's apparent innocence, some people, especially mediums, became concerned about the board's secret powers. With the release of the movie The Exorcist in 1973, the Ouija board's popularity exploded. In that first scene of that movie, a young girl becomes possessed by the devil after playing alone with the Ouija board. Off the back of that film's success, a lot of religious groups denounced the board as evil, claiming it was Satan's preferred form of communication. And over the years, the Ouija board patent has been passed around. First, it was bought by the Parker brothers and then Hasbro. As people's feelings toward the board changed, so did the country's marketing strategy. Ouija board tagline was once, "It's just a game, isn't it?" Now it says, "Don't play Ouija if you think it's just a game." Today, people are split between those who believe in the power of the Ouija board as a method of communicating with the dead and those who think it's just an entertaining pastime. But time and again, skeptics and naysayers have been converted once they've experienced the Ouija board for themselves. Despite believing spirits can't communicate, or in many cases don't exist, they changed their mind once the spirits started talking, as they invariably do. Planchette moves so frequently that researchers have studied the subconscious minds of people using the Ouija boards. Theory goes the player's subconscious minds guide muscular movement, which gives the impression of planchette's moving of its own free will. And even researchers don't think the subconscious explains all the board's apparent powers. According to psychologist Chris French, I don't have any doubts in my mind we can explain the vast majority of ostensibly paranormal experiences by looking into psychology. Whether or not we can explain every single one is a $64,000 question. Well, whether the planchette moves because of the player's subconscious or from the consciousness of a spirit with an urgent message, or some stories of spiritual connection through Ouija that can't be explained as anything other than paranormal experiences. So we're going to talk about a few of them. For every person who believes in the power of the Ouija board, there are just as many who would never buy a word of it. Some of these skeptics doubt the board can be used to communicate with the paranormal world. Others simply claim there's no paranormal world to begin with. Either way, such beliefs never seem to stop the skeptics from trying out Ouija, even if just to prove their friends wrong. Things become intriguing, though, when these same skeptics, people who are willing to ridicule paranormal nonsense time and again, come to reassess their opposition to Ouija board and the paranormal after trying the board for themselves. Some of them become fervent believers. And these are the people with the most convincing stories. There was one skeptic who used to play the Ouija board regularly with his friends, but always complained he was one of them that doing it when the planchette moved. Now, his two friends were strong believers, so the skeptic decided to prove their guilt by blindfolding him while they played the game. And his friends agreed to this, and he secured them both with blindfolds and checked to make sure they couldn't see. He was confident his friends wouldn't be able to move the planchette properly, and they'd have to admit the game didn't work. Well, the results of his experiment was a lot more than he anticipated. He asked the board, "Is there a spirit here that wishes to communicate?" After a moment, the planchette moved over to no. Well, he figured his friends just got lucky when they moved the planchette, but still, it shook him. He decided to challenge his friends with a question that wasn't so straightforward. He said, "Why don't you want to communicate?" Well, the planchette moved and spelled out WAITING, waiting. Well, to the skeptic's shock and fear, it hit each letter perfectly. Now there was no way he could assume his friends were doing the talking. He said, "What are you waiting for?" Planchette slid over to no. Then it spelled out WHO, who. Then he said, "Well, who are you waiting for?" The planchette hit no again, and it went to 201-9231. It was a very precise response. Didn't make any sense to the skeptic. Then the skeptic said, "Who are you? What's your name?" And the spirit spelled out STOP. Well, he started to think that the spirit really didn't want to communicate with him, that he still wanted some answers. So he said, "Please talk to us." And the reply was NO, followed swiftly by a pop as the light bulb shattered in the lamp the boys were using, which, of course, set the room into pitch darkness. Well, the skeptic found a flashlight and found a new bulb and put it in the lamp. By the time he'd replaced the bulb, his friends had taken off the blindfolds. On the table, the planchette had moved over to goodbye. And the friends swore again and again they took their hands off the planchette when the bulb blew out. Well, the skeptic figured his friends were trying to spook him and could have moved that planchette from no to goodbye when he wasn't looking. But one thing was for sure. There was no way they were responsible for the spirit's reluctant communication with the blindfolds on. There was more to it than them playing a trick. Well, educated in science and logical reasoning, doctors are probably the least likely people to believe in a spirit world or the ability to communicate with it. They also see death on a regular basis and probably have a hard time coping with the paranormal if they really did believe. But despite this, the Ouija board did manage to convince one doctor that he may have contacted an evil entity. This doctor wanted to remain anonymous. He was 30 years old. Found himself playing with a Ouija board one night with his 22-year-old sister. She had brought it over for late-night scary entertainment with a few friends. Well, the very first time the planchette moved, the group was contacted by a person who had committed suicide recently and had a message for somebody in the room. The doctor and his sister were the only ones touching the planchette and had no knowledge of the spirit or what had happened to him. Still, the doctor and his sister were able to act as mediums, delivering intimate details between the spirit and his friend, who was understandably startled by the communication. So the group decided to give the board another try a different night and found themselves communicating with a very energetic spirit who spelled Z-A-Z-A over and over, followed by S-E-X and a series of gibberish. Well, frustrated, they let that spirit be and tried again the next night. This time the spirit spelled M-A-M-A at an alarmingly quick pace. They tried asking the spirit what it meant and what its name was, and they never got a clear answer. Planchette zoomed around the board and made a figure 8. one point, it counted down the alphabet backward. Well, the doctor and his friends had had enough and decided to stop, but when they took the hands off the planchette, it continued a gibberish message on its own for a few seconds before it came to a stop. After that, the doctor felt he had no choice but to believe in the impossible and became pretty weary of the Ouija board in general, and shocked by the experience, he worried that an evil entity may have been trying to communicate or even manipulate them through its nonsensical messages. Well, there's another story that came to my attention. There was a young man growing up in a quiet town, never interested in wasting time with Ouija boards or anything like that. One day he saw a moving van on his street and went over to introduce himself to the new neighbors. That's when he met Anna. Beautiful girl. She's 18, just like him, and lived with her two young sisters, 16 and 13, and their mother. Anna and the young man became great friends, and he liked her even though she was into the boards, as it was called. Her mother was a tarot card reader and got all her daughters interested in communicating with the paranormal. One day the young man decided to invite Anna over to his home. Of course, she asked him to play the Ouija board, some kind of game that was no interest to him, but he agreed anyway, and soon enough Anna was talking to some spirits, asking all kinds of questions. The young man became a little afraid of the whole thing, and then the only question he really remembered Anna asking was, "So what did you do in life?" Although through the Ouija board, the spirit responded he'd been a bus driver. So Anna said, "Show yourself," and the planchette moved over to goodbye. Well, the young man never thought much about it until 2 weeks later when he discovered Anna had been hit by a bus. She died. At her funeral sometime later, Anna's sister Grace approached him about the Ouija board. She insisted she'd been communicating with Anna since her death. The young man said that spirit isn't her. Leave the Ouija board well enough alone. Grace began to cry and eventually convinced him to come over to her house so she could prove it. The young man wasn't surprised that the spirit claimed to be Anna. He didn't believe a word of it and played along as it seemed to be giving Grace some comfort. Grace said to her sister through the board, "I wish I could see you again. Goodbye." The session closed down, and Grace and the young man never spoke about it again. The young man was still the skeptic, of course, until an accident at the end of the year convinced him of the Ouija's powers and made him swear never to use it again. At the end of the school year, shortly after Grace got her driver's permit, she was hit by a bus and killed as well. Clearly, the bus driver, he believed, had something to do with it. Well, a lot of folks think the 1973 film The Exorcist was the scariest movie of all times. And if you've seen it, you remember the very beginning. A little girl makes a terrible mistake. She plays the Ouija board all alone. She ends up possessed by the devil and terrorizes everybody around her. Well, that movie has stuck with a lot of us, so much so that never use a Ouija board alone has become the #1 rule of contacting the spirits. It's sad if you don't follow that rule, horrible things will happen. We're going to talk about Sarah and her friends. They loved playing Ouija board together, usually during the daytime. They would always call on one spirit named Ged, G-E-D, who told funny jokes and didn't make a whole lot of sense. For Sarah, Ouija was a fun experience. One evening she was alone in her room. Her friends didn't come over that day, and she wanted to talk to Ged. She was also curious. Secretly, she'd always suspected her friends might have been responsible for Ged and his jokes, and if she tried it alone, she'd know for sure. When she got off the board and was contacted by Ged almost immediately, she thought it was pretty cool that he was speaking to her alone, and she didn't pay much attention to the questions she asked or the answers he gave. After a few minutes of chatting, the planchette suddenly stopped. She said, "Are you still there?" The planchette didn't move. Just then, the lights in her bedroom went out. Freaked out, she ran to her bedroom door, thinking the power had gone out in the house, but to her surprise, the door wouldn't open. The lock was on the inside, so she turned it back and forth, trying to get the door to open, and it wouldn't budge, almost as if somebody was holding it closed from the other side. Well, scared, she started yelling for help. As she pulled and tugged on the door in the dark, her sister heard her and came running down the hallway, and she opened the door with ease. She said, "What's the matter?" And Sarah said the door was stuck. "Who was doing that?" And sister said, "I didn't see anybody. It opened just fine." Well, Sarah suddenly noticed the hall light was shining behind her sister's head. Power hadn't gone out. All the other lights in the house worked fine, except for the one in her room. She burst into tears and able to explain to her sister why she was so scared, but she did manage to say, "I'm never going to play Ouija alone again." Well, our next story revolves around Cameron. He was about 12 or 13, and he spent a lot of time at home alone. His mother was in the hospital, and his father was working all the time. Now, his parents were deeply religious, absolutely loathed anything that might be considered evil, such as Ouija boards. But Cameron was curious and decided to take advantage of his newfound freedom. After making a Ouija board from scratch, he sat at the dining room table with a glass of water and put his fingers on the planchette and said, "Hello." Immediately, the planchette moved, slowly spelling out hello. Well, he was surprised but excited and decided to keep calm and do a little bit more exploring. He said, "What's your name?" Planchette moved to Sophia, Sophia. Eager to know more about Sophia, he asked another question, "Why are you here?" He deflated a little bit because the planchette didn't move this time. After a minute, he tried a different question. "Are you trapped?" Still, the planchette didn't move. "What do you want?" Still nothing. "What do you need?" Still nothing. Frustrated, Cameron was about to give up when he thought about something, and he said, "Are you a demon?" In a swift jerking motion, the planchette slid to yes, and at the same time his glass of water flew off the table and shattered on the wall behind him. Startled, he jumped out of his chair only to feel dizzy. He worried he might pass out, so he wandered out the front door to get some fresh air. And that's the last thing he remembered. When he woke up, his father's face was looming over him. He was lying in the front yard where he'd fainted. His father asked him what had happened, and he kept saying he couldn't remember. He didn't want to tell his father he'd used a Ouija board in the house. When he walked back inside, Cameron saw the Ouija board he'd made had disappeared. He walked wearily up to his bedroom only to find it had somehow been trashed. Books were all over the floor, some of them torn, and toys everywhere, even in the hallway. Cameron didn't know how that could have happened. He didn't care. He was just too tired, and he collapsed onto his bed and cleaned up the mess later. He vowed he was never going to tell his parents about the Ouija board, but also to never use it again. He was sure he had drawn something evil to the house and was only more certain as time went on. About once a week, he'd open up his door to his room and find it completely ruined. His father thought it was Cameron lashing out, and Cameron never told his father the truth. That story is still playing itself out. Kayla had a Ouija board that was homemade. She also kept it a secret from her parents. Her mother had sworn them off Ouija. Had never had experience with a talking board as a child and never went into detail about what really happened. And because her parents couldn't know about it, she decided she'd do it alone. Knew about the first rule of Ouija, but figured it was no big deal. Tried to call on the spirits in her room one night, and nobody responded to her question. Still, she persisted, that because she felt there was a spirit in the room. Well, as soon as she put her hands onto the planchette, the air thickened and the room grew cold. Despite the chills running down her spine, the planchette never moved. Later that night, after giving up on Ouija, she was lying in bed when she heard a loud thunk on the roof above. A few seconds later, her father opened the bedroom door and said, "Did you hear something?" She said, "I think so. Maybe it was the cat." Then they heard thunk, thunk, thunk off the roof, and it definitely wasn't the cat. It sounded like a heavy footsteps, like an angry man stomping across the roof. Scared, she ran downstairs, and her father right behind her. Then she ran into the living room and said, "Mom, there's somebody on the roof." Her father ran into the back room, came out with a shotgun, went outside, and Kayla and her mother listened to him climb up on the roof, feeling tense with fear. A few minutes later, her father came back inside and said, "Well, whoever it was, they got away." He said, "I saw a shadow jump down from the roof and disappear into the woods." Well, she freaked out, but couldn't bring herself to tell her parents she used the Ouija board alone in her house. So instead, she went upstairs, locked her bedroom door, crossed the room, and locked her window. Then she got the Ouija board out from under her bed and folded it in half with the planchette inside and put a paperclip on it so it couldn't be opened. A flimsy solution to be sure, but what else could she do? Well, she climbed back in the bed and turned out the light and lay there awake, unable to sleep, thinking about the man on the roof and wondering where it came from. Then a new sound split the air, a growl. She sat up in the bed, and again she thought the cat might have been responsible for the sound, so she got up and looked around the room. But she couldn't find the family cat any place in the room. So she crawled back into bed, turned out the lights, and closed her eyes, and the moment her eyes shut, the growl came again, louder and stronger and closer. She turned on the lights and left them on. After a long time sitting in silence, she slowly slipped off to sleep. Ever since that day, her house has been plagued by strange and threatening sounds heard by everybody. She began to believe a demon was living in her home, and she knew exactly how it got there, through the Ouija board. And even with all the confusion and fear the sounds caused, she could never tell her parents that she had actually invited whatever it was into the house. Well, most people try using the Ouija board to contact the spirit world, do so at home. Few realize that by doing so, they're potentially inviting unwanted guests to come into the house. Some spirits are harmless, gentle observers, do nothing more than give you goosebumps when you realize they're there. Unfortunately, others try to take advantage of your hospitality. Well, this next story comes from Halloween night, 1968. After trick-or-treating, Crystal thought it'd be fun to bring a Ouija board over to Nancy's house for him to try. And the board gave Nancy the creeps immediately. Her mom was a psychic and she knew a lot about the occult, and she thought that the Ouija board was dangerous and told the girls to be careful. Well, Nancy never played before, so Crystal taught her how it worked. Started by asking silly questions to the board, and the girls started getting appropriately silly responses. Crystal said, "What was I in another life?" And the board said, "You were a needle in God's eye." Crystal swore she wasn't moving the planchette, but the board spelled it out the responses so easily, Nancy was convinced she had to be. When it was Nancy's turn to talk to the spirit, she decided to ask the same thing. What was I in another life? And the planchette spelled out, "You were a nail in God's hand." Nancy was bored with all this stuff and decided to try something different. And she said, "What boys do I like?" And the board said, "Go to hell." Crystal thought this was hilarious and asked, "Okay, who am I going to marry?" The board spelled out, "You're going to marry the devil." Nancy asked, "Is there a spirit in our house?" The girls were shocked to see the planchette fly rapidly across the board. And it spelled out, "We're here." It took them a moment to understand what it said. So they asked, "What are the names of the spirits in the house?" And the board spelled out names, and the girls couldn't understand them. Nancy asked, "Where did you come from?" And it spelled out hell, where you're going. Well, the girls let out a scream, which brought the mother running into the room, and her mother decided she had a bad feeling and asked them to stop using the board. Quickly, Crystal asked another question. The planchette started spinning across the board. Nancy's mother grabbed a pen and paper and started writing down each letter as it spelled it out. "We're here and we won't leave." And then the board started spelling out a string of curse words, followed by a message that made the girls' hands fly around with the planchette. The mother screamed, "Take your hands off of it now," and everybody was frightened, and the room filled with a cold chill. Nancy's mother had a scared look on her face as she digested the news the spirits weren't leaving. Out of nowhere, a loud sound started banging on the stairs leading to the basement. Nancy's little sister Bonnie came flying into the kitchen, and one look at her face showed she was terrified. On the verge of tears, she ran up to her mother and said, "Something touched me downstairs, slapped my back. There's nobody down there, Mother, and something slapped my back." Their mother gasped when she lifted up the back of Bonnie's shirt and found red marks on it. Bonnie said, I heard a voice say something." And their mother said, "What did it say?" The voice said, "You hate your mother." Mother said, "It's okay, nothing's going to happen, but this is enough. Crystal, put that thing on the coffee table, and don't forget to take it with you when you leave. You three take a few minutes to cool down and just play. It's going to be all right. Just go play." Well, Crystal put the Ouija board on the table, and all three girls started to walk out of the kitchen. Just as Nancy was at the door, she saw something out of the corner of her eye. It flew across the sitting room into the kitchen and went flying past the mother and crashed into the wall. Her mother screamed, "What was that?" And she looked under the table next to the Ouija board and found something startling. Her new camera, which was now broken. Everybody was bewildered about how this could have happened. The camera had film in it, so the mother decided she'd take it to the pharmacy to be developed the next day. They'd had enough fun for the night, so Crystal took her Ouija board and went home. 1 week later, the film was ready, so Nancy's mother went to the pharmacy and picked it up. All the photos of a dark, hazy figure looked like he was sitting on a smoky horse. Looked very strange, and after showing the girls the photos, Nancy's mother said, "Never again will we have a Ouija board in this house." Well, one couple living in Alberta, Canada, decided to go to the toy store and buy a run-of-the-mill Ouija board for some afternoon fun. They were a little superstitious, so they figured it was best to use only the Ouija board at 3 p.m. because it was said to be the time when Christ died and the time that the Virgin Mary ascended to heaven. On the other hand, 3 a.m. is considered to be the witching hour. It's a time when a veil of darkness blankets the earth, and using the Ouija board at that point in time would invite communication with the most unholy of spirits. The couple lived in a small basement suite, and they were curious if any spirits might be sharing their home with them. And every time they used the board at work, connecting them with some spirits from the beyond, started using the board regularly to contact one particular spirit who'd like to stay in their house. They discovered through the Ouija board he was a Pakistani and his English wasn't that good. They struggled to communicate with the Pakistani spirit. It kept spelling out a name over and over. It appeared to be a last name. So the couple decided to look it up in the phone book. Sure enough, the name was there, associated with their address. They communicated with the spirit again and found out he was in fact murdered in that house. Wasn't able to leave their basement home, but he was happy to be there. The couple became curious if he was really in their home and watching them, so they decided to ask him what color their dog was. After a moment's pause, as if to study the dog, he spelled out white. Next, they asked him what color the wife's hair was, and he spelled Minnie, and that was actually true. Her hair had a lot of different colors in it. They asked if he was present in her house, and if he was watching them, and he said yes. Well, they decided to take the communication to the next level to see if the spirit would be willing to play copycat. The wife knocked twice on the table and asked him if he would repeat the sound. She and her husband heard a very distinct knock 2 times. They thought it was eerie, and a few hours later they tried to use the Ouija board and were only able to contact the Pakistani man in their house, and he was the only spirit who ever spoke to him now. They didn't feel like he was dangerous, but their house from then on had a certain strangeness about it, now that they knew there was somebody else in there with them, always watching them. Well, from a house with one spirit, let's talk about 2 friends who found a Ouija board at a bookstore in downtown Orlando and decided to buy it and give it a try. These 2 girls named Marta and Jenny took the board home to Marta's house and managed to contact the spirit. And they asked that spirit a lot of questions about his past, and they decided to change topic and ask him how many people in the room. The spirit said there were 4. And this was strange because it was only the 2 girls and the spirit seemed to be present, so who was the unknown 4th? Both girls figured it was just the other one trying to mess around, so they took their hands off the planchette, and just as they did, it started to move on its own, spelling out CLOSE. They decided that to mean they should close the board, so they did. But first, they decided to say 5 prayers, asking God for his blessing on the house. Well, a few days later, Marta decided to tell her mother what had happened with the Ouija board. And to her surprise, her mother was very upset and asked Marta to never use that board again. Apparently, their family had a bad history with spirit boards. Marta's mother told her a story. Marta's grandmother used a spirit board when she was in her 20s. She really enjoyed using it and would constantly consult the spirits for advice, asking questions and trying to get information about the world beyond. Loved it so much she became lost in the spirit board, started to see things she couldn't explain. The objects would move throughout the house, felt some kind of presence always with her. The family decided to call in a priest to exorcise her of any spirit she might be carrying, and it worked, and Marta's grandmother never played with the spirit board again. But Marta's mother had heard this story from her own mother, but never really believed it until she started playing on the Ouija board herself. Also, in her late 20s, when her friend decided they'd play with the board together. They had a lot of fun, sometimes making jokes, moving the planchette around themselves, and at one point they contacted a spirit who seemed very interested in her mother. Started asking her all kinds of questions about her mother. That was Marta's grandmother. Where was she and why didn't she play anymore? Marta's mother became a little spooked, remembering the story her mother had told her, so she and her friend closed the board with some prayers. But her friend was jealous that Marta's mother had managed to contact such an active spirit and continued to play with the board. Then strange things started happening. Objects started moving around the house. The spirit seemed angry and agitated. She called in Marta's mother to help her, and they called on the priest to take the board and dispose of it. 2 women never played again. But Marta, like her mother before, didn't believe the stories. She and her friend Jenny continued to play and were always contacted by the same spirit. The good one asking the who had told him to close the board before. And every time they contacted the spirit, he would ask him how many people in the room, and he'd always say 3. They asked him to warn him if another spirit ever entered, and he said he would. One time while they were communicating, the planchette started spinning, telling him to close, spelling the word evil, bad, 4 in a room. Curiosity got the best of him. The girl decided to try and contact that 4th person. They said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am. Are you good or evil?" And the spirit didn't respond. They decided to contact the good spirit again, but the new visitor wouldn't let him talk. Every question they asked, he would say no. Just as the girl started to get upset about the strength of the spirit, he started asking questions about Marta. He said he felt like he knew her from somewhere. When Marta jumped away from the board, shocked, she knew who this spirit was. She ran crying to her mother's office, apologizing for not believing her. And her mother knew exactly what happened. Took the Ouija board from the girls and put it in the living room. Jenny had no idea what was going on, and Marta's mother left to get the Bible, and that's when the planchette started moving on its own. It spelled out, "I know who you are." Marta's mother returned, "Stop," or order you to stop. Marta's mother sat down at the board. The girl sat terrified in the background. She didn't want the spirit to attach itself to either of the girls, started reciting prayers, trying to cast the spirit away. "Do what you want to me, but not my child, not my child. You're not going to touch her." She called on God to cleanse the house. That's when things went crazy. Objects started flying around, and they could hear a strange sound like somebody was breathing hard in the room. Then Marta felt somebody slap her face. Marta's mother became furious, put the Bible directly on the board, and continued to pray to God. Marta joined her, and so did Jenny. They began to calm down as their prayers strengthened them. And after a minute, all the chaos stopped. The energy in the room felt positive. Again, the planchette moved on its own. It spelled out "close," C-L-O-S-E. Immediately, the girls knew who it was. It was the good spirit. Marta's mother gently closed the board, took it away, and the girls never saw it again. Well, that's just a few stories about some of the odd things that happen when you use a Ouija board. I know of a couple of folks when I was in college who actually got answers to school questions that they didn't have any idea how to answer. And the answers they got from the Ouija board are always correct. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk about more strange and unusual topics. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.